The four companies that build the machines that make every advanced chip on Earth just lost between 4 and 8% in a single session, while the S&P 500 closed green. Also today, an unreleased Anthropic model cut a post-quantum cipher's security by a factor of 67 million. And 37 companies launched an artificial intelligence security alliance that OpenAI, Google, and Anthropic all skipped. Start with the scoreboard from Tuesday, July 28th, because it does not look like any artificial intelligence sell-off you have seen this year. SanDisk closed down 14.25%. Micron fell 8.85% to $820.53. AMD dropped 8.15%. Applied Materials lost 7.82%. Lam Research 7.54%. Western Digital 6.91%. KLA 6.18%. ASML down 4.37% to $1,582.95. Now the same session at the other end of the stack. Alphabet closed up 2.19%. Microsoft up 1.09%. Nvidia up 0.25%. The S&P 500 finished up 0.21% at 7,428.78. The trigger, reported Monday by The Information. China has begun producing its own immersion deep ultraviolet lithography machines. And here is what makes this different from every previous artificial intelligence wobble of the last 2 years. The market did not sell artificial intelligence. It sold the moat. To models and technical work, and the most consequential result published in the last 24 hours came from Anthropic, and it was not a launch. In a research post dated Tuesday, the company described using a model it calls Claude Mythos Preview, which is not publicly available, to attack cryptographic algorithms semi-autonomously with minimal human guidance. The headline finding is against Hawk, a post-quantum digital signature scheme currently under evaluation by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. The model produced an improved key recovery attack that reduces Hawk 256's security level from 2 to the 64th down to 2 to the 38th. That is a factor of roughly 67 million. It also found what Anthropic calls a Mobius bridge fingerprinting technique, which speeds up meet-in-the-middle attacks on 7-round AES by 200 to 800 times. Now the caveats, which Anthropic states plainly, and which most coverage will quietly drop. Nothing here breaks a deployed system. Hawk is a candidate, not a standard. The AES result applies to a reduced round variant, not the full 10-round cipher, and actually executing it would cost hundreds of millions of dollars. So why does it still matter? Because cryptanalysis is one of the very few fields where a machine result is either correct or it is not. There is no benchmark to game, no grader to charm, no leaderboard to overfit. When a lab claims its model did novel mathematics, this is the domain where that claim can actually be checked by strangers. The one genuinely new set of open weights in the last 24 hours is small, and that turns out to be the point. Fermion Research published Neutrino 1, an 8.19 billion parameter dense model under the Apache 2 license. What is unusual is not the architecture. It is a Qwen 3.8b derivative, decoder only, grouped query attention, 36 layers, a 40,960 token context. What is unusual is the storage. The weights are held in a coded ternary format roughly 1/8 the size of standard 16-bit floats, and they stay bit-packed at rest, decoded inside the matrix kernels rather than expanded into memory first. The download is 2.56 gigabytes. On disk it becomes 3.88. It runs on an 8 gigabyte graphics card or a 16 gigabyte laptop. The published numbers are 72.1 on MMLU, 80.2 on strict instruction following, and 396 tokens per second single stream on an H100. Pair that with the other result developers spent Tuesday arguing about. A reported $500 reinforcement learning fine-tune of a 9 billion parameter open model, outscoring frontier systems on a narrow catalog review task. Neither of these is a frontier model. Neither claims to be. But together they describe a direction no leaderboard measures. The best model is getting better slowly and expensively. The cheapest model that is good enough for one specific job is getting cheaper very fast. Most of the economic surface area of this industry sits in the second sentence. And the technical dissection of the largest open model in history arrived faster than most launch coverage does. Moonshot AI released Kimi K3's weights on Monday. By Tuesday, Sebastian Raschke had published a full architecture teardown, and a separate walkthrough of the linear attention family underneath it drew more than 260 points on Hacker News. 3 things stand out. First, K3 pairs multi-head latent attention with what Moonshot calls Kimi Delta attention, a linear attention variant, instead of standard attention throughout. Second, it drops rotary position embeddings entirely and uses no positional embeddings anywhere. Nope. Across the whole network, which at 2.8 trillion parameters is an aggressive bet that most labs have not been willing to make. Third, it uses latent MOE, compressing the large linear layers the same way latent attention compresses the key-value cache, which Raschke notes is essentially the design that appeared in Nematron 3 Ultra. There is also a smaller trick called attention residuals, connecting residuals across layers by attention weighting, reportedly improving validation loss for about 4% extra training cost and 2% extra inference cost. Why spend a minute on this? Because of where it is legible. The open-weight frontier is now the place where the architecture is published and independently read within a day. The closed frontier is where it is not. If you want to know what a 2.8 trillion parameter model is actually made of in 2026, the only one you can read is Chinese. To companies. And the most revealing thing about this week's biggest industry announcement is who did not sign it. On Monday, NVIDIA launched the Open Secure AI Alliance with 37 founding members. The list is not small. Microsoft, IBM, Cisco, Cloudflare, CrowdStrike, Palo Alto Networks, Red Hat, Hugging Face, Elastic, SpaceX AI, and the Linux Foundation are all in it. The stated mission is open technology for securing software and artificial intelligence agents across the full stack: identity, permissions, isolation, guardrails, logging, model formats, secure coding workflows. NVIDIA also open-sourced a research framework called Inoue under Apache 2, which represents agent behavior as Python classes where any method left as an ellipsis gets completed by a language model, and everything else stays ordinary deterministic Python. Now the absences. OpenAI is not on the founding list. Neither is Google. Neither is Meta. Neither is Anthropic. That is every organization currently training a closed frontier model. 2 readings are available, and they are not mutually exclusive. The charitable one is timing. Several of those companies did sign a separate industry policy letter on July 24th. And joining a formal alliance takes legal review. The less charitable one is structural. An open, shared, auditable security layer for agents is worth an enormous amount to companies selling infrastructure and considerably less to companies selling the model itself. Worth noting what the announcement did not include: no governance structure, no published roadmap, no stated member commitments. 37 logos is not yet a standard. Staying with the labs. And this next one is uncomfortable but verifiable. Anthropic shipped Claude Opus 5 on July 24th. Over the last 24 hours, 3 separate threads about it climbed the developer forums at the same time. The largest, at more than 380 points, is a benchmark write-up from the team behind an open context engineering guide, testing models on something called Slopcode Bench. It is a long-horizon coding benchmark that deliberately does not reveal the whole problem up front. Instead, it feeds requirements in through successive checkpoints, the way RAIL specifications actually arrive. On a 17-checkpoint subset covering circuit evaluation, a database migration, and a config service API, Opus 5 passed 4. Opus 4.8 passed 1. Sonnet 5 passed 1. It also wrote about 29,000 lines of source against roughly 9,000 for each of the others. So Opus 5 is 4 times better than its predecessor on the hardest available test of this kind. And the author's conclusion is still that for real-shaped software engineering work, built one issue at a time, today's models cannot be reliably deployed without human guidance. Alongside that benchmark, a widely shared post arguing flatly that Opus 5 is a bad model, and a support complaint from a paying customer whose subscription had been unavailable for over a week. We flagged 3 separate Opus 5 service incidents on Anthropic's own status page yesterday. Here is the honest read, and it requires holding 2 things at once. Opus 5 measurably improved on the hardest long-horizon coding test anyone has published, and it is simultaneously generating more user friction than any recent Anthropic release. Benchmarks measure the ceiling. Forums measure the floor. A frontier lab has to ship both. To products and developer infrastructure, where the Model Context Protocol shipped a new specification dated Tuesday, July 28th. It is the largest structural change since the protocol was first published, and the one-line summary is that MCP is now stateless. Previously, it behaved as a bidirectional stateful protocol. A client opened a session, held it, and both sides talked over that connection. In the new specification, every request is self-describing. It carries its own protocol version, client identity, and capabilities in its metadata, and the session handshake and the session ID header are simply gone. Server-to-client interactions, asking a user to confirm an action, requesting a missing parameter, are now handled by a new mechanism called multi-round-trip requests, rather than by holding a bidirectional stream open. 2 new HTTP headers, MCP-method and MCP-name, let a gateway route and authorize a call without parsing the JSON body at all. Tool, prompt, and resource lists became cacheable with time-to-live and cache scope hints. Authorization moved from dynamic client registration to client ID metadata documents with proper issuer validation. And the tasks extension graduated out of the experimental core. Anything depending on session identifiers breaks and requires migration, though all 4 Tier 1 SDKs already support the new spec. Here is the scale check that explains why this is worth a segment. The maintainers report the Python and TypeScript SDKs have crossed 1 billion cumulative downloads, running at roughly 500 million a month across the Tier 1 SDKs. Every one of those redesign choices, stateless requests, header routing, cacheable lists, is a choice you make for load balancers and gateways, not for laptops. This is no longer a protocol experiment. It is plumbing, and it just got rebuilt for traffic. To policy, where the single most discussed item anywhere in artificial intelligence over the past 24 hours was not a law, a lawsuit, or a launch. It was a position paper. On Monday evening, Anthropic published a post titled Our Position on Openweights Models, and it passed 1,100 points on Hacker News, several times the score of any other story inside the window. The core of it is Dario Amodei stating directly that Anthropic has never advocated a ban on openweights models, and that openweights models which do not have dangerous capabilities are a public good, because they do not cost anything beyond the compute needed to run them. In place of restrictions on openness itself, the post argues for 3 specific measures. Export controls on advanced chips to China together with real enforcement against smuggling. Action against industrial-scale distillation operations backed by authoritarian states, and mandatory safety testing for any sufficiently capable model, whether it is open or closed. The framing separates 2 fears that usually get merged in this debate: an authoritarian government reaching superior capability, and any actor misusing a powerful model for cyber or biological attack, and argues that open weights are irrelevant to the first, and that bans do not solve the second. The reason this landed as hard as it did is the calendar. It arrived roughly 24 hours after the largest open-weight model in history shipped from a Chinese lab, and roughly 24 hours before Western semiconductor equipment stocks sold off on a report about Chinese lithography. A safety-first American lab publicly declining to ask for a ban. In that particular week, is a real data point about where this argument has moved. To the market board. Every price here comes from live market data at Tuesday's United States close, the most recent completed session, and nothing in this segment is investment advice. Start with the damage and read it as a stack. Semiconductor capital equipment first. Applied Materials closed down 7.82% at $476.46. Lam Research down 7.54% at $269.61. KLA down 6.18% at $190.80. ASML, the only company on Earth that makes extreme ultraviolet machines, down 4.37% at $1,582.95. Now memory and storage. SanDisk down 14.25% at $1,096.10. The largest single-day move anywhere on this board. Western Digital down 6.91% at $463.51. Micron down 8.85% at $820.53, having broken below 800 intraday for the first time since late May. Then Compute and Merchant Silicon. AMD down 8.15% at $454.62. Intel down 5.86% at $86.30. And the artificial intelligence infrastructure names, which are not chipmakers at all. Nebius down 9.68% at $169.69. Vertiv down 6.27. Palantir down 6.08. CoreWeave down 4.93. Taiwan Semiconductor's American listing fell 1.7%, and South Korean prices in our data only run through Monday's Seoul close. So we are not quoting Samsung or SK Hynix for Tuesday. Now the other half of the same session, which is what makes Tuesday genuinely unusual rather than just ugly. Alphabet closed up 2.19% at $333.71. Microsoft up 1.09% at $393.35. Apple up 0.94% at $340.08. And Nvidia, the company with more direct exposure to every single stock in the previous segment than anyone, closed up 0.25% at $197.01 after falling 5% the day before. The indices barely registered any of it. The Nasdaq Composite closed at 24,876.91, down 0.22%. The S&P 500 closed at 7,428.78, up 0.21%. So on a session where 11 artificial intelligence adjacent names fell between 4 and 14%, the broad index finished green. That is not a market losing faith in artificial intelligence. That is a market repricing which layer of it is actually defensible. For 2 years, the working assumption has been that the hardest part of this stack to replicate is the physical part, the lithography, the high bandwidth memory, the fabrication, and that software would commoditize first. Tuesday was the first session that priced the opposite, a world where the physical layer gets commoditized faster than the model layer does. 5 domestic lithography units this year, and about 20 next year, does not change anyone's 2026 earnings. It changes the terminal value. And the same morning, The Economist ran a piece under the headline that artificial intelligence revenues are growing fast, but not fast enough. Held together, those two things are the entire argument the market is now having with itself. Finally, what to watch, and Wednesday, July 29th, is one of the densest days on this quarter's calendar. First, at 2 p.m. Eastern, the Federal Reserve releases its policy statement, with the chair's press conference half an hour later. Economists polled by FactSet expect rates held at 3.5% to 3.75%, which would be the 5th consecutive hold. This is one of the 4 meetings a year with no summary of economic projections, so there is no dot plot. The entire signal sits in the language and in the press conference. At least one strategist quoted in Tuesday's sell-off coverage argued markets are underestimating how hawkish that language could be. Second, after the United States close, Microsoft and Meta both report. Microsoft has guided to roughly $190 billion of capital expenditure for calendar 2026, and across Amazon, Alphabet, Meta, and Microsoft, the combined figure plan for the year is around $725 billion. Given what just happened to the equipment stocks, the CapEx line and the cloud growth rate will be read together rather than separately for the first time in a while, because if the market has genuinely started discounting the hardware layer, then every dollar of that CapEx is buying an asset with a shorter assumed life than it had on Friday. Third, AMD reports on August 4th, which is a materially more interesting event today than it was on Monday. And on August 2nd, 4 days from now, the majority of the European Union's AI Act becomes applicable, including transparency obligations for general-purpose artificial intelligence and for synthetic media. Everything else on this list is a number. That one is a deadline. That is the day the machines that make the chips lost more value than the chips did. A model nobody outside Anthropic can use cut the security of a post-quantum cipher by a factor of 67 million. 37 companies agreed to secure artificial intelligence together, and all 4 labs building the closed frontier took a pass. And the largest open model on Earth turned out to have no positional embeddings anywhere inside it. No new frontier model shipped today. We would rather tell you that than pad the segment. Every price came from live market data at Tuesday's close. Every claim is sourced in the description, and none of it is investment advice. Back tomorrow.